All right, let's take a look at lesson 9, solving radical equations. We're going to practice solving radical equations. So first, let's take a look at 9.1. Solve these equations mentally. So if I have the cube root of x equals 1, well, I know that if I'm going to cube a number and get 1, that number has to be positive 1. I can't have a negative 1 because negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is negative. So x has to be 1. All right, for the next one, the square root of 7 equals the square root of x minus 1. Well, so basically they're both under the radical, so 7 has to equal x minus 1. So in this case, x has to equal 8 because 8 minus 1 is 7. And then for the third one, square root of 100, that's 10. So 2 times what is 10? X equals 5. And then for the last one, we have the square root of x plus 1 is equal to negative 5. Well, in that case, you can't take the square root of any number and get a negative. So this one has no solution because there is nothing you can plug in for x that's going to give you, when you take the square root, a negative number. That's just not possible. So we know that one has no solution. All right, so let's take a look at 9.2. Getting to the root of the problem. Find the solutions to each of these equations or explain why there is no solution. All right, so for these problems, the easiest way to solve is to square both sides for number 1, because we want to get rid of our radical. So if I square both sides, I end up with a minus 5 equals 25. Right, and then I'm going to add my 5. So I get a equals 30. And then if I plug that answer back in, because anytime I square both sides, I have to plug the answer back in. So if I plug that back in, I have the square root of 30 minus 5 equals 5. Square root of 25 equals 5, and that is true. So I know I'm good with my answer. All right, then for number 2, I'm going to cube both sides. And that's going to get rid of my radical. And so I get a minus 5 equals 125, because that is 5 cubed. And then I'm going to add my 5 over, so a equals 130. Then I need to plug that back in. So 100, oh, that's cube root. 120, no, it's 130. Minus 5 equals 5. Cube root of 125 equals 5, so we're good there. All right, so then we are going to do the same thing here. We're going to cube both sides. And so b is equal to negative 8. And if we plug that back in, cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. That is correct. All right. Number 4, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. And we're left with the square root of c is equal to negative 2. So then we're going to square both sides. Oops. All right, so we end up with c equals 4. And if we plug that back in, we get square root of 4 plus 2 equals 0. Well, that's not possible, right? Because you cannot take the square root of anything and get a negative, and you have to have a negative in order to add to the 2 to get a 0. So it's no solution. Okay, so it's no solution because you can't take the square root and get a negative. And that's what we need to be able to add to 2 to get 0. All right, so Let's go ahead and box in our answers there, just so it's a little more clear. Okay, number 5. We're going to add that 4, subtract the 4 from both sides. So we get the cube root of 3 minus d is equal to negative 4. And then we'll go ahead and cube both sides. So we get 3 minus d is equal to, let's see, what would that be? Negative 64. All right, and then we're going to subtract the 3 from both sides. So there's not a whole lot of room here. Negative d is equal to negative 67. So d is equal to 67. And if we plug that back in to the original equation, 3 minus 67 plus 4 equals 0. Cube root of negative 64 plus 4 equals 0. Negative 4 plus 4 equals 0. That is good. So d is equal to 67. All right, number 6, we're going to square both sides. So 7 equals x minus 1. Then we're going to add that 1 over. So x equals 8. And let's plug that back in and check it. So square root of 7 equals the square root of 8 minus 1. That looks good. So that works. Number 7, we're going to square both sides. Now be careful when you square both sides here. We get 36 equals, and you have to square the y and the 3 and the y. So that's 9y squared. And then we're going to divide both sides by the 9. So we get 4 equals y squared. Take the square root of both sides. So y equals 2 or negative 2. Now we got to plug it back in. So the square root of 36 is equal to 3 times 2. 6 equals 3 times 2, which was 6. So that's right. That one's good. Square root of 36 equals 3 times negative 2. Well, the square root of 36 is 6. 6 does not equal negative 6, so the answer is just y equals 2. It does not equal the negative 2. All right, and then finally the last one, let's cube both sides. Ooh, this one's going to be a big number. All right, 22 cubed. I cannot do that one in my head, so I'm going to break out the calculator. There's my scientific calculator. That'll be easier. 22 to the third is 10,648. Z cubed equals 11. All right, and then we're going to divide by that. So I get 10,648 there, and we don't really need the calculator anymore. That is really hard to see. Sorry, I wrote that very messy. Okay, that's a little better. Okay. So then, z cubed equals 11 over 10,648. We're going to take the cube root of both sides. So I'm going to take the cube root of the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator. You could do the whole thing all at once, but you'll see why I do this in just a minute. So we end up with z equals, and we can't take the cube root of 11, so we're just going to leave that as the cube root of 11. That's the exact form. If we were to change it to a decimal, that would be an approximation, not an exact form. But we can take the cube root of 10,648 because we just cubed 22 to get that, so we know it's over 22. And then we could plug that back in. So we had 22 times the cube root of 11 over 22 equals cube root of 11. Well, your 22s are going to cancel. So yes, the cube root of 11 equals the cube root of 11. So that is an answer. All right, so that is how you can solve equations that involve radicals.